Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and I consider myself a nerd.
That is a good impression, but Jason is not a nerd. Just FYI, he's not a genuine nerd, as Toby Radloff would say.
I like things out of nerd culture, but I think one of my strengths is I can float from group to group, Josh.
That is true. You are like a Renaissance man, a man of the people, something like that.
Yeah, that's right. I am, as we have said before, a social butterfly sometimes, unless I'm very antisocial, which I can also be. Anyway, let's do the episode of this show, shall we?
Let's do that. We're talking about the films of 2003 in this season. And in this episode, we are talking about the Grand Jury Prize winner at the Sundance Film Festival, which is American Splendor, featuring Toby Radloff, the genuine nerd, both the genuine Toby Radloff and the version played by Judah Friedlander, but mainly about Harvey Pekar, the writer of underground comic books, creator of American Splendor, the comic book, and as played by Paul Giamatti in this film, as well as appearing on screen himself in this sort of documentary fiction hybrid thing that's going on in this film from writer-directors Robert Pulcini and Shari Berman, which is, this is their first. Well, if we call it a narrative feature, this is their first narrative. They worked in documentaries leading up to this. And this film did win the Grand Jury Prize at Sundance. It was also at Cannes, where it won the Fipresci, I think that's how you pronounce it, the Critics' Prize, and was nominated for an Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay, which it also won from the Writers Guild, the Best Adapted Screenplay Award. So highly acclaimed film. As well as a successful movie at the box office. I mean, this is a small-scale film. It had a budget of $2 million, but it grossed $8.7 million at the box office. So that's a pretty good result for a movie at this level, and a movie that was originally not even intended to be released in theaters. That was originally made as an HBO film, and executives at HBO, I think, saw something in this movie and decided it deserved to be a bigger deal. Which I think was a smart move. Of course, now that would be the opposite. It would never, it would be a big deal because it's released on HBO Max or whatever, and it would get the full promotion. But at the time, that was sort of a leveling up to be released in theaters.
And we kind of saw that last year, right before the pandemic, with Bad Behavior, Corey Finley's movie, which with Hugh Jackman. I think that would have had a nice little box office run, but they went to HBO and they were going to keep it on HBO, and that was all there was to it.
Right. That's Bad Education, the Corey Finley movie.
What did I call it? Bad Behavior?
Yes.
Well, can I just tell you, Josh, I have bad behavior for not remembering the title, Bad Education. It's been a rollicking time since the pandemic, Josh.
Yes, it's been quite some time now, but we're still forgetting things. But you're right about that. I mean, that's a movie that premiered at festivals and was looking for distribution, and that HBO paid a huge amount of money for so that they could put it just on HBO and not release it in theaters. So yeah, this is certainly sort of maybe not the opposite, but definitely not the trajectory that a film like this would necessarily have. But at the time, again, shows the confidence that these executives had, that they had something bigger on their hands, and they were right about that. And this movie was highly, highly acclaimed by critics, in addition to all its awards. And it was interesting to me looking for reviews, because it seemed like a lot of the critics, they spent a lot of time talking about the American Splendor comic book. It seemed like surprisingly large numbers of film critics were already familiar with Harvey Pekar and his comic books, which I guess maybe is not that surprising, because if there's a kind of person who would identify with Harvey Pekar, it might be a film critic, I think.
And why do you say that, Josh, as a film critic? What is it that you relate to?
Well, I mean, he's a bit downtrodden. He's very self-critical. He's very pessimistic and cynical, but he's also very intellectual. I mean, that's the interesting thing about Harvey Pekar in general, I think, is that he's this kind of salt of the earth guy, and he works this working class job and lives in this crappy apartment, but he reads highbrow literature and he listens to jazz. I mean, he himself is a critic. It doesn't really, there's some brief mentions of it in the movie, but he was a highly accomplished music critic, a jazz critic, writing for newspapers in Cleveland. So yeah, I think all of that is identifiable amongst many people who are film critics.
I would agree. He's a misanthrope, but at the same time, he appreciates great art. He doesn't necessarily connect with people as he'd like to, but he has a longing to. And I think there's a great scene where Joyce first comes in and he takes her to like an Applebee's type restaurant, some type of kitschy theme flair restaurant that's totally corporate. And she's totally unhappy. And she goes, I never imagined you would eat at a place like this. And he goes, I wouldn't. I thought you would like it. Right. But the charm isn't in those places. It's in the places that he would normally go to.
Right. That he somehow thinks wouldn't be good enough for her when he's trying to impress this woman, because he has this constant sense of like his own lack of self-worth. But of course, that's why she likes him, because she's read in his comics about his life and she is drawn to that. So I assume they never go back to that restaurant. Also, she gets food poisoning, so presumably.
Yeah, but Josh, you as a critic, tell us more about your lack of self-worth.
Let's not. Let's hear from Roger Ebert, who said, who definitely was one of these who was familiar with the comic and with Harvey Pekar, also from his David Letterman appearances in the 1980s. Roger Ebert said, the peculiarity and genius of American Splendor was always that true life and fiction marched hand in hand. There was a real Harvey Pekar who looked very much like the one in the comic book and whose own life was being described. Now comes this magnificently audacious movie in which fact and fiction sometimes coexist in the same frame. This film is delightful in the way it finds its own way to tell its own story. There was no model to draw on, but Shari Springer Berman and Robert Pulcini, who wrote and directed it, have made a great film by trusting to Pekar's artistic credo, which amounts to what you see is what you get. Movies like this seem to come out of nowhere, like freestanding miracles. But American Splendor does have a source, and its source is Harvey Pekar himself, his life and what he has made of it. This guy is the real thing. And I mean, all credit to Harvey Pekar, but I feel like some of these reviews, especially from people who are very familiar with the comic, almost downplay the filmmakers who, really rise to the challenge of adapting something that is in a lot of ways unadaptable.
I love that sequence where Crumb first, who obviously we've talked about Crumb in our documentary episode, Crumb from 1984, Robert Crumb takes
1994.
That's what I meant, 94. I knew that one. That's just me misspeaking. Daddy went out a little too late last night, so, but I knew that was 94. I'm not going to take the hit on that one. Anyway, but thank you, Josh. Where he starts drawing the comics, based on the kind of stick figure drawings and captions that Pekar gives him. And then you're seeing those kind of meld from real life into the comics, so you're seeing the Pekar character played by Giamatti, not played by Pekar. So there's a lot of going on in here. But Pekar is walking down the street and he has a thought of, how bad humanity is. And then you see that flash into the comic. And I thought that was a really, really effective way to show the adaptation. And to show the birth of the comic.
Right. And I think, there's so many layers to like the representation of Harvey Pekar. We've got the real guy in the documentary footage. We've got Paul Giamatti playing him. We've got drawings from the comic that kind of come to life at different points and that are different themselves. When he's drawn by different artists, he looks differently and we see various views of him in the movie. And we even have that one brilliant scene where Harvey and Joyce, played by Paul Giamatti and Hope Davis, go to see the stage play of American Splendor, where they're watching actors playing Harvey and Joyce, and we are watching actors playing the actors who played Harvey and Joyce in this play. So and it's Molly Shannon and Donald Logue who play those characters. Which I almost like flashed on an alternate version of this movie where Donald Logue and Molly Shannon were the stars of it, which, also could have been interesting.
It could have been interesting, but obviously Giamatti and Hope Davis just home runs with their performances. I think this might be like my favorite of both of their performances of anything in their filmographies.
Yeah, they're great. I didn't mean to imply that they're not great. They are, and I don't think that other version would be better. I was just imagining that it could have existed and could have been good. And that's kind of the genius of the movie is that it's got all these different conceptions of itself that kind of all come together.
I agree. And Josh, there's also that scene where, Harvey and Joyce have never met. This is pre-internet days, obviously. And Harvey's, they're talking on the phone and they've already written letters, and Harvey's trying to convince her to come visit him in Cleveland. And she goes, I don't know if that's a good idea, Harvey. And he says, why not? And he goes, well, different artists draw you in different ways. So I don't really know what you look like, and I don't know what I'm getting, And I thought that was a really kind of honest statement, because she is obviously attracted to the intellect and the personality, but there has to be a physical thing there too.
Right. And of course, when she arrives and she's in the bus station waiting for him to meet her, we see her imagining all the different versions of him from the comics, some of which are looking kind of hideous and some of which look kind of appealing. And she's just sort of wondering which version she's going to get until he finally shows up. So yeah, I think they do a great job of combining all that stuff. And that's a difficult thing to do. Lisa Schwartzbaum in Entertainment Weekly was more appreciative of that. She said, American Splendor presents Pekar as drawn on the page, Pekar as brilliantly interpreted by Paul Giamatti, and the actual Pekar in the double role of narrator and interview subject, sometimes all at once. Such moments are enough to make a movie lover bark out loud, exultant. Just as the author in his comic books discovered an original way to honor the challenges of everyday life, so have Berman and Pulcini, documentarians by profession, come up with an inventive new movie hybrid that is its own formal breakthrough. Rarer yet, for all the elegance and verve of their solution, the filmmakers keep the focus on the characters, indeed on the casual heroism of the ordinary, which is the profound revelation of the whole meta Pekar project, yet don't get precious about their production team's own superb craft. So I think she's giving them the credit that they deserve here, and maybe because they had made documentaries in the past, and I think I saw one quote from them where they were basically like, well, we didn't really know any other way to make this movie. But regardless of why, I think they really, they found the exact right way to make the movie.
Yeah, I agree with you. And that's not so much, but a good part of the charm, because there is a quote from the filmmakers where like, well, once we started interviewing Harvey Pekar, we knew we had to have him in the movie, right? And then you see him alone, and he's again a charismatic character that you want to watch. And then him and Joyce together, it's so interesting to watch their relationship. You're like, these two are in love, but not in a bad way. You're not like, oh, they dislike each other. You're like, they're so comfortable with each other. They just put up with each other in the best possible way. But I agree, and I was thinking about it. I haven't seen a movie that has touched this in this form of mixing documentary and kind of narrative and animation, done as effectively since then. I mean, I was thinking of like The Big Short, when they had to do all those sequences where they brought in the real people to explain what actually happened, right? And it was like, I get it, but this is the most effective version, and they're the creators of it, I guess. So kudos to them.
Yeah, it's a tough thing to pull off, I think. And you could watch this movie and think, oh, this is such a brilliant approach to the material. And, someone else should approach a true story kind of movie that way too. And someone else might not be able to do it. So
we usually see it in reverse, right? We see it as a documentary, and then we see the dramatizations or the animations. And then this is a narrative film that's incorporating the documentary and the animation. So it's a really cool play on a form.
Right. And I think, what they could have also done is when they met Harvey and Joyce and thought that they were so great, they could have said, you know what, we're just going to make a documentary and forget about the narrative aspect. But they make both parts of it, as Lisa Schwartzbaum says, they're both like equally valuable and important. And we usually, like you said, think of a movie being kind of one with a little bit of the other, or one way or the other. And this one is both sort of in a balance. So that's good.
Yeah, you're right, Josh, because since they are such interesting characters, and there's totally enough to do a feature length, and as we saw with Crumb, right? That would have been fine. That would have been a good movie. So I actually think it was really gutsy to do it this way.
Right. So Manohla Dargis in the LA Times was another one who was obviously very familiar with the comic, and she was overall positive, but felt like this movie kind of fell short from what she thought of in the comic book. She said, The filmmaker's prankish visual style works far better when it serves the comic's deeper truths, like the scene when Joyce sees all the cartoon Harveys at the train station. American Splendor is about a cheap, ill-tempered schlub, but it's also about how we cling to our human selves, our individuality, even as the world tries to smash us to pieces. As Pekar muses in one of the comics, who is Harvey Pekar? The question lies at the heart and troubled soul of the comic, but it's easy to imagine that the filmmakers, who probably felt that they were already out on a limb with such a down-and-out anti-hero, didn't want to alienate the audience by letting Harvey's multiple personalities rip. So instead of the fractured Harvey, they give us a grumpy but fundamentally decent guy with a couple of cartoon personalities and a comically harridan wife. And I think she's really being overly harsh, but I'm not, a devoted American Splendor comic book fan. So I did see at least one person on Letterboxd also mentioning that this movie had kind of toned down the political aspects of Harvey Pekar's work. And we get a little bit of that in the scene where he kind of crashes and burns on the David Letterman show, but that's about it.
Well, I can see that. And I know he's written some political, books, not just in the comics, but actual books that focus on it. But I mean, it's a movie that's like an hour and 40 minutes. How much can you fit in there?
Right. And I do think that Manohla Jargis here is kind of nitpicking. And I think she's going a little too far to claim that this is a sort of like sitcom version of Harvey Pekar. I don't think that that's the case at all. And I think this is an accessible movie that people who aren't familiar with the comics or with underground comics in general could still enjoy. But I don't think it's a movie that's dumbing itself down.
Josh, how familiar were you with these comics before you saw the movie?
Before I saw the movie for the first time, I was not familiar with the comics at all. And subsequently, I do have, in fact, I'm pretty sure as a promotion for the movie, maybe at award season or something, I got an American Splendor, like a big kind of omnibus collection of a bunch of American Splendor issues that had like a new cover with Paul Giamatti on it that I ended up reading. So since I saw the movie the first time, I have read some American Splendor. I mean, I think I just read that because I had gotten it for free and it was enjoyable. But I didn't necessarily decide, I need to read all of Harvey Pekar's work. And the thing about that too, the comics that the movie really needs to change is the comics are very episodic. There are a lot of just little short vignettes of like, here's something I did today. And there are a handful of pages. And so to craft that into a feature-length narrative is another challenge that these filmmakers have.
Yeah, the first time I saw it, I liked the movie. And this was, again, since we always talk about it, I don't think I saw it in theaters, but it would have been on video at the time when I worked at Blockbuster. So this is definitely one we all knew about and wanted to watch. So I think that was easy to do. The other thing is the first time I saw it, I wasn't, I'm not a comic guy per se, and it didn't make me want to read it. But after this time, I definitely want to read some of this stuff.
Yeah, it's good stuff. And it's more, we talked about Crumb, the documentary, and Crumb's work is a lot more abrasive and kind of weird and in your face. And the Pekar stuff is very much, it is down to earth. It is just about like a lot of the things like you see in the movie. Like I went to the grocery store and I was trying to figure out which line to get in and things like that. But it draws you in. So yeah, I think I saw this movie, I'm pretty sure in the theater, possibly at a press screening at the time that it came out. And I remember liking it a lot and liked it a lot again this time as well. Dave, did you see this when it came out?
I'm sure I did. I don't remember if it was in the theater or not. But yeah, it was definitely something that I really liked at the time, but I'd never revisited until now. And I really loved it this time.
Did you ever read any American Splendor comics?
I've never really been a comic book guy, so no, not at all.
Do you know how to read?
Not very well.
Well, comic books are helpful because they have pictures.
Yeah,
that's true.
You can figure a lot of it out without the reading, Dave.
Yeah.
Are you good at interpreting pictures?
Sometimes.
Well, I mean, he does host a movie podcast, so hopefully he is.
Well, they talk to him on the movies. They talk, Josh. So he just doesn't
they talk to me.
Watch the pictures. Let's move on.
We've downgraded Dave's intellect quite a lot here in the last couple minutes. Any other background you want to mention on this movie, Jason?
I mean, like you said, tons of awards, tons of lists at the end of the year, right? So, and Josh, I think as sadly we know Harvey Pekar died, about 10 years ago, I'd say, at this point in time.
Yeah, he died in 2010. So he did get a chance to sort of experience the success of the film and the renewed attention that it brought to his work. But yeah, he did pass away.
And on his gravestone, it says, "Life is about women, gigs, and being creative," which is a great quote.
That is, certainly a fitting epitaph that, anyone could aspire to. So we'll come back then in a moment and talk about our general thoughts on American Splendor. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2003, we're talking about Sundance Film Festival Grand Jury Prize winner American Splendor. And we've talked a lot about the combination of the documentary form and the narrative form that this movie does, which, as we're saying, I think is just so brilliant. But let's talk about, just because that's brilliant, that doesn't discount the great acting, the great performances in this movie. Paul Giamatti is so good, and this was a big breakthrough for him. And I was sort of surprised that, he didn't get an Oscar nomination for this movie or Sideways later, which I just had assumed he had. But I feel like he's maybe a little underrated, Paul Giamatti, at this point.
I agree with you, and I love him in this. And a lot of the stuff I love is, he's created, or his take on this character, which is an accurate interpretation, shall we say, right? Like it's, you're never going to do a quote unquote impression because then it's not real. So you're interpreting it. And I think he does that in a great way. But the Pekar character is a big character, right? It's a larger than life character. And it would be so easy for him to go over the top with that. But his facial expressions when people are talking to him are brilliant, And when Crumb first asked him, if he can animate some of the, drawing some of the stories that he did, and he's just like, "Yeah, man," and he just you see this face of like I did it, and there's this pride, and I never thought this would happen. It's just it really gets so much out of his facial expressions, and he's great. I agree with you. He is underrated. Like I want to see him in everything.
Yeah, and he's
name a thing, Josh.
Anything. We want to see him on Awesome Movie Year, right? We'll get him in.
Yes.
He'll play one of us, and then we'll comment on it, and it'll be brilliant. Yeah, I think you're right. The facial expressions are great, and also the voice. There's a whole thing, especially at the beginning of the movie when it first introduces him. The first stuff we see is this whole bit about how he's lost his voice because he just yells at people all the time, and he's damaged his vocal cords, and that sort of strained voice, it continues, and it's obviously some kind of affliction that he has throughout his life. And when he gets agitated, he starts losing his voice again. And I think Giamatti really, he has his own voice, of course, Giamatti, and it's a distinctive sounding voice, but he really captures that sound of Harvey Pekar and the way that it sort of strains it just to get words out. So it's very much, and Harvey himself in the narration at one point says, "Oh, this guy doesn't look anything like me." And that's fair. But at the same time, you see in this movie the real Harvey and Paul Giamatti, and you have no trouble connecting them to being the same person.
Well, and that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie is, they do a lot of these kind of interviews on this white background soundstage, and they move props in and out for the interviews, right? And there's one scene where you see Giamatti and Judah Friedlander watching Harvey and Toby, the real Harvey and Toby, and they both kind of stay in character, right? Judah Friedlander just looks ahead emotionless, and meanwhile, Paul Giamatti is so in love with watching Harvey Pekar talk. It's just great,
Yeah, it is, and you can tell that he is really immersed in that character, in that person. And the other performance, Hope Davis is great. She kind of, she doesn't come in until, I don't know if it's quite halfway through the movie, but there's a lot of movie before she shows up, and she really invigorates it. Not that it isn't good, but I think she brings it to another level, and the relationship between Harvey and Joyce really deepens this beyond just this kind of, again, episodic story, maybe more like the comics where it's just, here's some random events from Harvey's life.
Hope Davis, who, as I continue to extol on every podcast, the Day Trippers, I love the film, and she's
Oh,
great
yeah.
in it, right?
Mm.
But I think structurally, it makes so much sense where they bring her in, because a lot of the time you might say, oh, she's coming in late as a love interest, but like Harvey Pekar is so set in his ways, and we need that. We need to see how comfortable he is and everything, with who he is and his own lifestyle. And she doesn't necessarily upend it, but she just, when you coexist with someone, you have to make changes. And that is just too much for him in a lot of ways. And it's too much for her in a lot of ways, right? And yeah, I really like it. I really like the way they built that relationship. Josh, I did want to go back. You're talking about Oscar nominations from that year. For actor in a leading role, who would you take out, Josh? As I ask as if I don't know. Sean Penn, Mystic River. He won it, right?
Uh-huh.
Johnny Depp, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl.
God.
Ben Kingsley, House of Sand and Fog, which is a great underrated movie, and he's always
I hate that movie.
Did you hate him in it?
I just hated everything about it, I remember.
Jude Law, Cold Mountain.
This is a terrible category.
And Bill Murray, Lost in Translation, you would leave in there.
Yeah, I'll take all the rest of them out, I think. Honestly.
Yeah, you'd leave Sean Penn in, right?
I liked Mystic River at the time, and I haven't seen it since, but I remember that every performance in that movie is just really overwrought. It's like a lot of acting. But sure, I guess. I liked that movie at the time. And it's so funny to remember how Pirates of the Caribbean was this like acclaimed thing, and it was a big comeback for Johnny Depp, I guess, at the time, and people thought of it. It's just such a caricature. And also, he became the lead of that franchise, but he's really a supporting character in that first movie. So he shouldn't have been in the best actor category anyway. This is really all not relevant to American Splendor, but...
Well, you brought it up,
Right. No, I just mean that Paul Giamatti doesn't get his due, And
no, I agree. I would say that the nomination for Best Adapted Screenplay was a much stronger category. City of God, Mystic River, Seabiscuit, Return of the King.
Yeah, that's a tough one to break through. But I think, again, deservedly so. And for all the reasons that we've been talking about how difficult an adaptation this is and how delicately they balance everything, that screenplay is a big deal. Of course, Harvey Pekar did not read it. And apparently in that great early scene where he's reading the narration and they ask him, did you read the script? And he's like, well, I kind of looked through it. So...
Well, I mean, in his defense, like he's had plenty of media experience and media appearances, and they've already adapted his work into a play, right? So I'm sure he didn't read the theatrical play before he went to see it either, right?
Right. And it's not, I'm not trying to criticize him necessarily. I mean, that's one of the funny moments of the movie because it's you can get his personality just in that answer. And that comes early in the film. And I would imagine that a lot of the dialogue and a lot of the narration in this movie comes directly from his comics anyway. So they're using his own words.
I also, since we talked about the actors, which we were going to do, I mean, Judah Friedlander, like we've never seen him as good. And, that's a character, but it made me think like, why can't we see him play other types of characters, And I love James Urbaniak as Robert Crumb. I thought that was a very good performance. And, the last thing I saw him in was Difficult People on Hulu, where he's kind of more of this whimsical character. And I want to see more. I want to see more James Urbaniak, who works constantly, but this was a memorable role for him.
Yeah, and I think, well, Judah Friedlander especially, and I don't know how well known he was at this point, but he became famous. And now he just plays Judah Friedlander, in movies. And I mean, he was on 30 Rock for years, and I love 30 Rock, but he basically just plays himself. And even when he gets cast as characters, a lot of the time you see him and he dresses like Judah Friedlander and he's got his little hats with phrases. That's his kind of like bit. And no matter what movie he's in or show he's on, he's just that guy. And so he really does immerse himself to the point where watching this movie, I had seen his name in the opening credits. And then Toby showed up and I was like, oh, who's that actor? And then it took me a second to realize, oh, that's Judah Friedlander playing that character because he is really immersing himself. And it's such a ridiculous character. That's another thing is that Judah Friedlander comes on screen as Toby and you're like, oh, he's really got to be exaggerating this guy. And then the real Toby comes on and it's like, nope, he did it exactly right.
No, I don't remember.
It's a great performance.
Toby from the MTV ads back in the day. Do you guys?
No, I think that plus the Letterman appearances, I think I was just a little too young to have been watching that stuff
Agreed.
at the time. Dave, did you see any of that?
I remember him on Letterman at least once or twice, but yeah, I didn't remember the MTV stuff though.
Yeah, I was sort of surprised that I didn't, but then I realized it's, because they're not always giving you the exact year of things as this movie goes on. But if it was all kind of in the early to mid 80s, and I think I was too young to be watching MTV at that point.
Josh, how about, we always talk about environment. It really does show a good, real blue collar Cleveland feel here, doesn't it?
It does. It definitely makes you never want to go to Cleveland. Or
I
at least not live there.
There's an episode of Parts Unknown with Anthony Bourdain where he does a Cleveland show, and he goes and interviews Pekar, and that was nice to see. I remember after it was a few years after the movie came out, and it was kind of nice to see that was still going and everything, and he was still Harvey Pekaring.
That's cool. I would like to see Anthony Bourdain and Harvey Pekar. I bet that's great. Yeah, and to sort of go to the Cleveland aspect of it, Joyce, of course, who's from Delaware, which sounds about as exciting as Cleveland. And when Harvey asks her if she would mind, moving from Delaware to Cleveland, and she says something great about how like all large American cities are soulless in the same way or something.
Well, I mean, if we're talking about Delaware, we have to go to Wayne's World with the great. We're in Delaware. Although it does have some nice beaches, I'll say that. And it is the birthplace of Capriati's, which we've all enjoyed over time.
That's true.
But Cleveland is a very blue-collar city. It's, I haven't been in 20 years probably, at least, maybe more. But, the food scene's coming up and the sports teams are coming up sometimes. And so they're doing all right.
Yeah, and it's the hometown of Harvey Pekar.
And you're saying it like, oh, it makes you not want to go to Cleveland. But I'm saying in like, you could see the way that this town helped shape this individual.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I mean, I think that is essential to Harvey Pekar is being from that kind of town. That's not only a blue collar working class background, but he lives in a city that is known for sort of not being notable. You don't think of Cleveland and are like, oh, Cleveland is the city of whatever. Cleveland is just like a place. And so I think that goes with just like his job, where he's a file clerk, is the most generic job you can think of, the kind of job that robots now do. And that's what Harvey Pekar is. So yeah, absolutely. It gets that. And I feel like if there isn't a statue of Harvey Pekar in Cleveland, there should be.
Yeah, you're right. And as a file clerk, he was offered promotions and always turned them down. So you get in your comfort zone and you stay there. How does that sound to you, Josh?
Yeah, I know I can identify with that. Certainly. A lot of ways to identify with Harvey Pekar from perspective of me and other film critics.
We got to talk about one other scene, which again, to me, I felt like it was I get why the tone had to change when he had cancer. Like it had to go down a little, but I thought I didn't enjoy that stuff as much, and not because of the cancer. I just didn't think it, had the energy, which maybe because it was all of his sickness and everything, of the rest of the movie. But then he passes out and he's got this dream sequence where he says, I'm Harvey Pekar. I looked in the phone book and there's another Harvey Pekar. And he goes through this list of Harvey Pekars and who they are and what they did and how they became Harvey Pekars. And it's surreal. And you could totally see an executive saying, cut the dream sequence, but man, is it awesome.
Yeah, I agree. That is a great. And that's just Giamatti delivering a monologue in front of a green screen and is doing an amazing job of it. And I think that balances what you're saying. The cancer stuff, it is serious and we lose a bit of his sarcastic sense of humor and it's downbeat, but not in a funny way. And I think that's a great counterpoint to that if we're getting close to feeling like, oh, this movie is too sad or too depressing or has gone too far from its original tone, here's something to bring it back. And maybe Harvey can't deliver this monologue at the moment because he's very, very sick, but imaginary, dream Harvey can deliver this monologue. And so it's put in there perfectly. But yeah, it's very funny. And it's a fascinating story. And it's also this existential musing on who are we? Who are any of us? So Absolutely. That is a great sequence.
One other thing about the movie that I really liked, as son of a world famous record collector, I thought that this movie really depicted record collectors or just collectors in general in a really, really authentic way that I haven't seen in too many other movies.
Pack rat and hoarding and obsessive.
Everything. And every item is so important and completely valuable in ways that no one else could possibly understand.
Yeah, I like at the beginning where they're talking about rock music, and he's like, rock's not bad. It's got its positives. It's not jazz, but it's got its positives.
And the collecting, there's a great running gag that starts when Harvey's, I think it's just his girlfriend, not his previous wife, but someone that this woman he's been living with. At the beginning of the movie, she's leaving and she's packing her stuff, and he grabs this really ugly looking like bronze sculpture, and he takes it and he won't let her take it with her. And that thing stays in the apartment all throughout the movie. And there's at least one other scene where Joyce is trying to clean up, and she's also trying to get rid of this awful sculpture, and he grabs it back out and puts it back on the shelf. And it's not, they're not drawing too much attention to it, but it really gives you that sense of who he is.
So it's interesting, the Joyce thing, maybe it was like they said it was, but I found that hard to believe that she would come in, have that bad of a night, see how horrible his apartment looks, and then go, I think we should skip the courting, let's just get married. That seemed a little unbelievable to me.
I mean, I'm pretty sure they wouldn't have done that if that wasn't the way that it really happened, because it seems unbelievable.
Yeah.
That you have to back that up by saying that that's how it really went. And I kind of believed it, because she, as much as she's portrayed as maybe a little more stable in some ways and bringing some balance to his life.
She is not,
right.
Josh.
She's just as crazy as he is.
Yeah.
And so I totally bought that she would do that. And in a weird way, if she had come in and they had a totally boring, pleasant night, she wouldn't have said that. But because they went through this harrowing experience right away, she's like, no, we need to get married. This is what has to happen.
Yeah.
I believed it.
She just diagnoses herself more than he does, right?
Yeah, I love that.
I got to say, when I was watching it, because as someone who does write screenplays, a lot of the time when I'm writing something, especially mainstream thing, it's, well, where's the conflict? And in this film, there isn't much conflict. Obviously, he has to go through the cancer battle. But who cares? This is so good. That's why that note sometimes just bothers me, because of movies like this that are just so good, and they're able to just tell stories about characters and keep you enthralled the whole time.
Yeah. And I think adding conflict would be so antithetical to the entire philosophy of Harvey Pekar's work that he would have revolted and not agreed to participate, because the whole point, and again, if you read the comics, it's even more like this, where this story is Harvey went to the grocery store, the end. And it's great. So I think you're right. And you could imagine maybe if this movie, again, because it was originally just supposed to be an HBO TV movie, if this movie had been bankrolled at a higher level somehow, that studio executives would have meddled with it in that way, and it would have been worse because of it.
Hey, Josh, before we rate it, I wanted to go over two alternative versions of this. In the 80s, Jonathan Demme tried to adapt it and couldn't figure it out. But, Jonathan Demme's an all-time great. That would have been a thing.
Yeah, I think that would have been excellent, yeah.
Yeah, and he's very good with kind of blue-collar stories also, And then a person who lobbied for the role, Josh, of Harvey Pekar, one Mr. Rob Schneider.
Oh boy.
Trying to imagine the version of this movie like I said, I would have definitely preferred the version that starred Donald Logue versus who's maybe not the greatest actor, but
Donald Logue's a good actor. I think
he's fine. No, he's fine. He's no Paul Giamatti, but he's fine.
Yeah.
But Rob Schneider. Wow. I'm just thinking of all the fake Rob Schneider movies from South Park, Rob Schneider is the carrot in American Splendor.
Yeah. Another funny, or he's a file clerk and Toby making copies, the Toadmeister, the copy machine, Tobaromas.
And who would have played who would we get Melanie Hutzel as Joyce or something in the Rob Schneider version?
Colleen from Survivor.
Yeah. So thank goodness we never saw that. That would have been not an awesome movie year episode, probably.
But what
Not
we did
right.
see is an excellent film here, Josh. So
Yes,
we
we
should
did.
rate it. What do you want to rate it out of?
I don't know. Out of different versions of Harvey Pekar?
5. Okay, I was going to say ornate Coleman albums.
Okay, we'll take that. Yeah, we didn't give enough due to the Harvey Pekar's love of jazz.
Well,
so.
and
Pekar would
as-
appreciate that.
Yeah, and he, he was very concerned of where his ornate Coleman album was during that.
Mhm.
That's
Joyce
true.
is
Yeah,
trying
when
to
Joyce
clean it.
can't let Joyce throw away
Yeah.
the Ornette Coleman.
You know,
album.
we gotta say, I'm sorry, we do have to make one more point. The stuff,
Okay.
the subplot with Joyce wanting kids and him not wanting kids, and how a kid comes into their life is lovely, and it works out perfectly, and it's not heavy-handed or overwrought, as you like to say. It just happens, and it's great.
Yeah, I
Mhm.
agree. I mean, and as someone who is very anti-kid, I loved that Harvey, first off, when he meets Joyce, tells her, "I've had a vasectomy," and I feel like there's certainly the pattern in a lot of Hollywood movies that we almost get to at the point where, he tells her that and he's very adamant and she says okay, and then she starts. There's a scene of her looking at some mother holding a kid, and that's a very mainstream Hollywoody thing to do. And you start to think, oh, how are they going to handle this? And are they going to sort of turn Harvey into this softy or whatever? But they don't. I mean, and obviously, again, just like everything else, it's handled in the way that it really happened. But I think you're right that the kid comes into their life in a way that doesn't discount either of them as people, either Harvey or Joyce. They kind of come to it in their own unique way. And the kid is obviously the right fit for these weirdos because she's a weirdo too.
There's that in the end. There's a great scene of Joyce and Danielle, like they're ice skating, right? And Harvey's in the stand, like eating a hot dog, and they kind of look over and he gives him like a pump, I think it's like more of like a fist in the air of like approval, and it almost brought a tear to my eye because it was right. They just did it right,
Yeah.
So out of 5 ornate Coleman albums, Josh, I'm at 3.5, very close to 4 on this one.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, we've been very positive and I think deservedly so. I might bump it up to 4 after our discussion. This is a really good movie. So, Dave, what would you say?
I'm right there at 4. So,
all right. Yeah, a good and maybe kind of underrated at this point, a movie that's not remembered as much as it should be.
Well, it's funny because we
Yeah.
talk about films that we discover on this show, and this was one that we rediscovered, right?
Yeah.
That maybe we because it was a Sundance winner and we knew we were going to cover it, we didn't even consider it for a personal pick, but like this would have been a great personal pick.
Yeah. So we'll come back in a moment and talk about the legacy of American Splendor. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 2003, we've been talking about Sundance Film Festival Grand Jury Prize winner American Splendor. And as far as the legacy goes, I mean, as we were just saying, this is a movie that maybe doesn't get enough attention anymore. I mean, obviously won at Sundance the year it came out. It was nominated for an Oscar, but I feel like it's not a movie that people talk about or revisit as much, and it should be.
Yeah, but that's kind of the fun of rediscovering it for us, right? This would be if video stores were still around, it would be, a Josh's pick or like, hey, you like this, now you got to check this out, right? I agree.
Right.
This is a fun movie to discover or rediscover, and it deserves obviously a lot of praise and watch it. It's on HBO Max at the time of this recording, and if you have HBO Max, we recommend you watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you maybe didn't see it or it just kind of passed you by back then, you haven't thought about it, check it out. Also, check out some American Splendor comics. Like I said, I enjoyed reading those. Harvey Pekar continued to create comics, including a graphic novel called Our Movie Year that he worked on with Joyce that was all about the experience of making this movie and the attention that it brought to them and the promotional cycle and all that stuff, which I don't think I've read that one. But, just like anything, that was what was going on in Harvey's life. So that was what he wrote about in his next comic book. And as we said, he passed away in 2010, but left quite a body of work. And Joyce Brabner has continued to kind of curate and manage the legacy of Harvey Pekar's work, and is herself a writer as well, more of a kind of political and academic writer, but continues to work in comics as well as I think in prose. And I was trying to find anything about their kid, if she herself is an artist or creator of any kind, and I couldn't find much, and not anything recent. So I'm not sure what she's been up to, if anything, but it seems like maybe she'd be trying to carry on the legacy of Harvey Pekar.
Right. Well, her biological father is a well-known comic book artist too, so she's got it all the way through, right?
No, that is one thing I think that was changed in the movie, that where she's the child of an artist who works on a Harvey Pekar comic, and I think in reality it was just a friend of theirs who was a musician, maybe.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, so I don't know if that's the case, but she certainly. I mean, what I read was when she was talking about, and the reason that she kind of gravitated toward them is because she had those artistic interests and they nurtured them, where her, she wasn't really getting that kind of support in her, the instability of the family that she had been growing up in. So I think at least when she was maybe, a teenager or in her early 20s, I mean, that was where I found some interviews with her and Joyce where she talked about wanting to follow in those footsteps, but I don't know if she actually has. We talked about Paul Giamatti, underrated. I was so certain that he had been nominated for an Oscar for Sideways that I was like writing that in my notes, and then looked it up and I realized he had not been. And Paul Giamatti, however, was nominated for an Oscar for Cinderella Man.
Yeah,
Cinderella Man.
He's good in Cinderella Man.
I liked him in it.
You're taking the piss out of Cinderella Man. It's not a bad movie.
It's fine. I like, as much as I like Paul Giamatti, I completely forgot he was even in that movie.
Was he playing like a trainer or something? I don't remember.
Yeah, he's like Russell Crowe's trainer, I think. And I'm sure he is good. But I mean, if you asked me what movie got Paul Giamatti an Oscar nomination, that would not be the one I would have answered.
Well, I'd have to look up his filmography also, but he was great in Private Parts, which kind of broke him, right? And then he do like a Saving Private Ryan or a big war movie at one point in time. I feel like he was very good in one of those. But he's working a lot, he's on Billions now, right?
Right. Some
12
people
Years
like
a
that.
Slave, right?
Oh yeah, he was in that too. Yeah. But yeah, Billions has been going for like 5 seasons. That definitely has a following.
Yeah, and that was a tough role to take because that was supposed to be Philip Seymour Hoffman's role, if I'm not mistaken. Mm-hmm. Then he died and Paul Giamatti stepped in, so that's not an easy thing to do,
And let's not forget the Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Oh, let's please forget that.
He was the only good part of the movie, by the way.
Yeah, I think it's good that he never got to go on and play that part again, because that's really not a good use of his talents.
Yeah. Absolutely not.
Where's Hope Davis lately?
I mean, she's also on TV. She was just on that crappy Bryan Cranston miniseries, Your Honor. She plays the mob boss's wife. And, she's like Paul Giamatti. She's working. She's not wanting for roles, but she has never been nominated for an Oscar, which, again, I just assumed. I went to look up which movie was Hope Davis nominated for an Oscar for, and the answer is none.
Well, you're talking about underrated. Like, I don't think you ever even think of Hope Davis when you're thinking of, like, actresses in that age bracket, and she's got a good body of work, man.
She does. And, I mean, both of them, again, they work steadily, and even if they show up in small parts, they're always doing great work. But neither of them have really had the chance to have a lead, certainly not in a feature film, in quite a while.
Well, Giamatti, didn't he do that one that was on Netflix that was well regarded like 2 years ago?
That's true, with Catherine Hahn. Is it called Private Life?
Something like that. It was was it Nicole Hoffman?
No, Hall of Seen. No, it was not. But that was a highly acclaimed movie that it's Tamara Jenkins directed that. I think I was a little let down by that movie because I had high expectations because it was so well reviewed. But it's actually sort of a Harvey Pekar-ish character, this kind of neurotic New York. Well, in that case, it's New York, and but not working class, but not upper class, but is sort of a neurotic intellectual, and overthinking things and being self-critical and all that kind of stuff in that movie. It's not a bad movie.
Yeah.
Hope Davis was great in Synecdoche, New York, too, speaking of neurotics.
There you go. And I think she was nominated for awards for that, but not for an Oscar.
Meanwhile, Shari Springer Berman and Robert Pulcini, the husband and wife director team here and writer team, they have had an interesting career, not really breakout hits here and there. I did like Cinema Verite, which was on HBO, which kind of was another narrative film about a real subject, which was a family that PBS followed around in the 70s, quote unquote, the first reality TV show, right? And they have a movie coming out maybe by the time this is released on Netflix on April 30th. Things Seen and Heard, based on Elizabeth Brundage's All Things Cease to Appear. Do you know anything about that?
That's like a thriller. Is Amanda Seyfried is the star of
Yeah.
it, and it doesn't look. I mean, maybe it'll be good, but it definitely doesn't look like something that plays to their strengths.
Yeah, they do a lot of different things, right?
Right. And I feel like when they've done those different things, it generally hasn't worked very well. And that the best thing that they've done is Cinema Verite, which is very much in the same vein as American Splendor. So maybe branching out. I mean, I think the next thing they did right after this was like The Nanny Diaries, which was just a dumb mainstream comedy. So yeah, they didn't get, you would think after winning Sundance, that's when you get the chance to really jumpstart the career, and it just didn't really happen for them. But obviously they're also still getting work, so good for them, I suppose. And Toby Radloff, the real Toby Radloff, also still doing stuff. I would have tried to watch Toby Radloff's starring roles in the Killer Nerd horror movies from Troma, which are not, if they were streaming anywhere, I was going to try to watch a little bit of one of them, but they're not. And those actually come before American Splendor, but he became a weird kind of star between that stuff and the MTV appearances. And there was a documentary about him called Genuine Nerd from 2006, which also it doesn't look like it's available really anywhere at this point, but he made the most of being Harvey Pekar's buddy, I think.
Good for him.
Genuine nerd.
Exactly. And big fan of Revenge of the Nerds. That's one great moment that we didn't mention from the movie, but the sort of discussion of the relative merits of that film.
Yeah,
after they see it.
I love how worked up Pekar gets.
But Joyce says, I think everyone should see this, right? It's the underdog story taking on the bullies. And I could just imagine today a woman recommending that everyone see Revenge of the Nerds.
Yeah, a lot of other stuff going on there that we probably wouldn't want to endorse anymore, or ever really. But certainly a funny aspect of the movie. And Toby's his sort of attachment to the idea of himself as a nerd, as his identity, is amusing. So maybe I'll get a chance to watch the Killer Nerd and Bride of Killer Nerd.
I hope you
from
do.
Troma.
That seems like something I would see on your letterbox list.
Well,
yeah,
Josh, as you know, I did watch Timmy Failure, Mistakes Were Made, as I told you I would. So I feel like before the end of the season, you need to watch a Killer Nerd movie, and we could talk about it in the epilogue along with Timmy Failure.
That's quite a combo there, Killer Nerd and Timmy Failure. Maybe they can team up someday. I think this legacy-wise also, between this and Crumb, which we've talked about, both contributed to kind of extra mainstream attention for underground comics, which is something that still pops up every now and then. I just saw at the virtual Slam Dance this year a documentary about Spain Rodriguez, who was another big figure in the underground comics at the time. And Robert Crumb is interviewed in that documentary as one of the main kind of supporters. So still something that people mine material from. And Crumb is still around, although he doesn't really... he lives his quiet life in France or whatever these days.
Yeah, 2 points about that, as we talked about in the Crumb documentary from 1994. They play some of Crumb's music in this film, in American Splendor, yes, which is nice. And Spain Rodriguez, if I'm not mistaken, was one of the artists who drew Harvey Pekar.
There you go. You're probably right about that. I don't know that it comes up in the documentary about him. It focuses more on his original creations. But that was one of the things, is that all of these figures, whether it was Crumb or Spain Rodriguez, who had their own, original creations as part of this underground comics movement, Pekar managed to get them all to help him too.
Right, and that the Fred character, who's Frank, was another one. I forget his last name, but Frank was one of the first underground comic artists that there was in like the 60s as well.
Yeah. So obviously Pekar had this sort of weird draw for these artists to work on his
Frank Stack.
Video. There you go. Yeah. And that Spain Rodriguez documentary is decent. It's nothing like Crumb. It's not as fascinating, but it's a good look at a another complicated figure. All of these guys were all these tortured artist types who maybe didn't treat women the best. And that was kind of what was going on in the underground comics at the time.
Well, I'm not going to judge the rest of them, but there was nothing in this movie that made me think Harvey Pekar treated women badly. He was just set in his ways.
Right. He was very in his own head and sort of wasn't always considerate or realizing of the needs of others, whether those were women or men.
Right,
so
exactly. That's just him,
Yes.
So, self-obsessed.
Yeah. That is true. They were all self-obsessed, these people. Anything else on the legacy here, Jason?
I'm ready for the Rob Schneider remake.
Oh God. It's probably Netflix will bankroll that. They like Rob Schneider, right? They've got him in a bunch of stuff. Okay, so that is American Splendor, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can follow us on social media.
You can. I'm Jason Harris Comedy on Facebook and the Instagram. Jay Harris Comedy on Twitter. And gopherjason.com. Needs a new artist or web designer or anything. We are at awesomemovieyear.com. Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram. Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. Thank you to everyone who's listening. We had a great month of downloads and we really appreciate it. So, and we love all the feedback. Thank you guys.
Yeah, we may be Harvey Pekar-esque misanthropes, or maybe just I am, but we certainly appreciate everyone who's listening and anyone who hits us up on social media and gives us some good or bad response, really, whatever you want to say. And also you can find me at joshbellhateseverything.com, at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and at Signal Bleed on Twitter if you want to tell me something about my misanthropy. And listen to our producer David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. And also, I mentioned it earlier, but I might as well do an actual plug for Wax Trax Records, where you'll find all the jazz music you need and probably American Splendor copies upstairs somewhere. I'm not sure, but I bet they're there.
Yeah, and the kind of place that Harvey Pekar would have enjoyed.
Oh, I bet he would be fighting with my dad on the daily.
What's coming up in our next episode, Jason?
Josh, this next episode is the film of 2003. This is the juggernaut, the icon, the one and only part 3 of 3 of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It's the Lord of the Rings, Return of the King.
That is the Best Picture Oscar winner. So tune in next time for Return of the King. And thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.